There are certain readings that seem to stick with us, that when we hear them, we just know how the story's going to go. And I think we had two of those stories today. Obviously in the gospel, hearing about the widow who gave the little bit she had and how it was worth more than everyone else because it was her whole livelihood. But also this story of Elijah. Hopefully many of us have heard this story before. And sometimes when we hear a story, we kind of know we've heard it before, so we start zoning out, or we don't want to go deeper into it because we already know how it's going to end, right? We know that Elijah is going to get what he wants. He's going to get that food, and him and this widow and her son are going to live for a year. It tells us all this in what? In 6 verses of chapter 17 of Kings. But there's a lot more going on here that we want to be aware of, and also a couple questions that are relevant to us today as well. As mentioned, we know that Elijah shows up to this town of Zarephath. He shows up and he sees this widow out there gathering sticks. Now, why does this widow have nothing to eat? What happened? Well, they're in the midst of a drought. All across the land, there's a drought. Now, unlike today, if we have a drought, we can obviously ship in water, we can drink bottled water. It's not the biggest deal. I mean, it affects us, but it's not going to cause us here, at least in America, to die. But back then, if they didn't have water, they were literally going to die. And this is what was happening. And why was this happening? Because Elijah even prophesied that this drought was going to happen. And before Elijah got to Zarephath, he was actually sitting underneath a tree, and a bird would bring him everything he needed every day, food and water. And it'd drop it off in his lap. Pretty cool. Wouldn't that be awesome? Be like being a baby again, huh? That'd be kind of cool, except for you can't talk. Which maybe be a good thing if I'm not up here. Anyways, getting back to the homily. All right, so Zarephath, he's in Zarephath, and why does he go there? Because God tells Elijah that he should go there and that a widow is going to provide for him the food that he needs. So there he is. He shows up, and he sees this widow gathering sticks. And so he asks her, very simple question. He says, can you go and get me a drink of water? Seems simple enough. Although remember, it's in the midst of a drought. So even water, of course, was sparse, but for some reason she knew where there was a well and she could go and get him the water. So she says yes. We're not sure why she says yes, but this widow goes and says yes. So there she is. Imagine this. She's walking away, and all of a sudden Elijah calls out again, oh yeah, and by the way, can you get me something to eat? Maybe you've had this happen to you before, where you say yes to one thing, and then someone, when you're walking away, says, oh yeah, and can you do this for me as well? You're like, no, I don't want to, but I'm already on the way, so I might as well, right? Well, this is what happened to this widow. But instead of saying, okay, I will, what does she do? She stops dead in her tracks. She turns around and she says, I can't do this. I can't give you anything to eat. I have no food myself. Me and my son, all we have left is a little bit of flour, a little bit of oil. As a matter of fact, I was gathering these sticks out here to go and make a fire so that we could have our last meal and then go and die. And then go and die. And yet Elijah says, don't worry. He says what? He says, do not be afraid. By the way, do not be afraid. Who also said that? One of the first things he ever said is Pope John Paul II. Do not be afraid. This is what Elijah says to this widow. Do not be afraid. Go and do as you propose. But first, make me a little cake and bring it to me. Then you can go prepare something for yourself and your son. For why? For the Lord God of Israel says, the jar of flour shall not go empty, nor the jug of oil run dry, until the day when the Lord sends rain upon the earth. So then this widow goes out and does it. Now you may be thinking in the back of your mind, well, of course, she sees that Elijah is a man of God. But this is not the case. As a matter of fact, if we were to continue to read Kings chapter 17, the next couple of verses after this year, when the food finally continues and the rain finally comes, what happens is that this widow's son actually dies. For some unknown circumstance, not out of hunger, not out of thirst, he just dies. And all of a sudden this woman goes to Elijah and says, what? How can this be? I thought you were supposed to provide for me. I thought that you were like a man with God. I don't believe this anymore. And Elijah tells her, calm down. And he goes to the upper room. And he breathes on her son 3 times. And her son comes back to life. And then she says what? Then she says, now I truly believe that you are a man of God. Now she believes. She did not believe this whole year before, even when the food was being provided for her. And she sure did not believe this when Elijah saw her that first time and says, "Go and make me a cake so that I can eat." So why? Why did she respond yes to this question? Well, we don't know the official answer. But what I would like to say is that she had a little bit of faith. She didn't have knowledge that everything was going to be okay. She didn't know that this was a man of God, but she had faith that this man could provide for her, could provide her what she needed, which was food for the next year. And of course, it worked out because she said yes. And she followed this inclination in her heart that something special was going on here. Of course, she is not the only example we have today of someone saying yes and giving everything they have. We know this is also the case with this widow in the gospel who gives her few cents, this little bit, over to the temple. Gives it all to God. She has nothing. Literally, a few cents got her absolutely nothing. But that little bit she had, that maybe would have saved her from starvation for the next day, she gave over to God. And why? Because she had faith that God was going to provide for her if she said yes to him. You and I, all of us here, have said yes to God. Some of us more willing than others. Some of you were dragged here to say yes to God because your parents are making you come to Mass, and praise God you are. Bring your kids to Mass, all right, even when they don't want to go. That's why I came all through high school, all right? But you are all here and you all said yes to God because you know that you're supposed to. But this is not all that God is asking of you to do. He's not just asking you to say yes once a week. God is asking you to say yes to him at all times. And he's always going to have follow-up questions for you, a yes or no answer. And every once in a while, we get to the point in our life where we simply say, "God, haven't I given you enough? Haven't I? You know, I come here on Mass to Sundays. I give to the church. I try to live a good life to the best of my ability. What about me? What do I get in return?" And when we start feeling that way, we have to take a step back and see, what do we get in return for saying yes to God? Well, what do we get for saying yes to God to come to Mass? We get the most important thing. We get God himself. We get to come here, and we get to receive the Eucharist. We give God an hour. That's all it is. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but we give him this hour. And what does he give us in return? Himself. Himself. And he becomes part of us, the Eucharist dwelling inside of us. We give him an hour, and he gives us his life, which he has done and which he will continue to do for us over and over and over again. What else are we supposed to say yes to? Whenever we say yes to God, it's not like we're giving him more. No, it's not possible to give God enough. We can't give more than what he gives us because he gives us life. And what we need to do is to be like this widow, like these widows, and continue to give. So we need to take a look in our life and say, God, where can I give you more? Where can I give the church more? What are you looking of for me? And is it going to hurt? Is it going to be painful? Of course it is. Is it going to cause us to worry sometimes? You know it is. That widow in the first reading, the widow in the gospel, it wasn't like all of a sudden all their worry left them. They're still worried, okay, what am I going to do for food? But you know what happened? God provided for them. And God will provide for you as well. What we need to do is we need to give ourselves over to God's divine providence, to respond yes to him in everything that we do. Not just in limited responses, not just on Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings, not just when we're praying with our kids, not just when we're praying with maybe some business partners of ours, which would be a great thing to do. We need to say yes even in the car when no one else is around and that person cuts you off. Then will you say yes to God and be nice to that person? Think of all these possibilities where you have not said yes to God, and what would happen if you truly did say yes? Your life would be transformed. What do we get in return? Like I said, we get what? We get God. we get his life. This is what we're longing for. When we look at our life and we see, what are we longing for? What do we need? We need God, and we need our life. And the only way that this is possible is when we respond to God over and over and over and over again. Yes. And what will he give you? Life. He will give you life. And there is nothing greater than that.